number 2, Mrs. Nichols has 3 containers. The weight of the first container is 12% more than the weight of the second. The third container is 20% lighter than the second. By what percent is the first container heavier than the third container? So this is a tricky one. When we approach this problem, we need to remember that we're ultimately comparing the third container to the first container. And the second container isn't really being used to be our whole, except to give us something to compare about. So that's kind of a weird idea. Let's look at my 3 containers. So I know that the first container is 12% more than the weight of the second container. I also know that the third container is 20% lighter than the second container. And what I'm looking for is by what percent is the first container heavier than the third? I'm going to need to approach this in 3 parts. To begin with, I'd like to define some variables. I'm going to actually define 3 variables. I'm going to say A is the first container, B is the second container, and C is the third container. So what that allows me to do is set up 3 different equations. So my first equation is represented by this purple highlighted section. The first container is 12% more than the weight of the second container. So if I think of the weight of the second container as B, this is 100% of B. But my third container is all of that 100% of B plus 12 extra percent of B. So that tells me that A is equal to 112% of B, or 1.12 times B. My third container is 20% lighter than the second. So if I think about B once again as 100%, my third container is only 80% of that whole, because we've taken 20% of it away. So I know that C, my third container, is equal to 0.8 times B. So here's where things get a little weird. We have 2 equations and 3 variables. That's not a great place to be. Speaking of B, let's solve for B in each equation. So in my first equation, if I want B by itself, I'll divide both sides by 1.12. That gives me B equals A divided by 1.12. My second equation, C equals 0.8B. To get B by itself, I'll divide both sides by 0.8, and I get B equals C divided by 0.08. At this point, I know that B is always the same weight. It's always 100% of B. So since those are both equal to B, I can set them equal to one another. So A over 1.12 is equal to C over 0. And I wrote 0.08 for some reason. That should just be 0.8. I'm sorry about that. Recall that it was 80%. So C over 0.8. My question is, by what percent is the first container heavier than the third container? So we're comparing to the third container. So I'm going to leave C by itself, C on this side, and solve for A. To get A by itself, right now I'm dividing by 1.12. I'm going to want to multiply both sides by 1.12. When I do that, I get A equals 1.12 over 0.8 times C. And if I take my calculator, 1.12 divided by 0.8 gives me 1.4. So I get A equals 1.4 C, which means that A is 140% of C. So in other words, By what percent is the first container heavier than the third container? The first container is heavier than the third container by 40%.